Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to have you here. My name is Joey Barnett. I'm a partner at WR Immigration, speaking today about E-2 visa with Patrick Findaro from Visa Franchise and Vetted Biz. Okay, let's do it. As I said at the beginning, my name is Joey Barnett. I'm a partner at WR Immigration in our Los Angeles office. And it is a pleasure to speak with you guys today about strategies for E-2 processing times with Patrick Findaro from Visa Franchise. Patrick and I have worked with many clients in the past, helping them achieve their immigration goals, getting here on E-2 visas. And so thank you so much, Patrick. Maybe you want to
No,
do
thank
it.
you.
Yeah,
100% approval, first time with WR immigration. So like across the board, wherever they're applying from, some of the cases were definitely difficult and kind of quirky. 100% approval. So, that speaks for itself. It's been a great joy working with you guys.
yeah. Well, no case is ever straightforward. There's always some sort of quirk, whether it's business related or personal related. But that's why you have to, work with an experienced immigration attorney to make sure that your expectations are correct, and that you're prepared for that so important visa interview when so many things could go wrong if you're not prepared otherwise. Um, so my principal area of practice is immigration to the United States through investment, whether that's E-2 or L-1 non-immigrant visas, or potentially EB-5 if you're going for a green card. But E-2 is one of my favorite visas because of the wide variety of clientele that want to do the E-2. And most of them are very entrepreneurial individuals. They're willing to take risks to succeed. And I like working with people like that. And part of my job as the immigration attorney is to provide the good news and the bad news so that these entrepreneurs can make an informed decision. It's a lot of money, it's their lives, their business, their family, and it's a huge decision to move to a new country. And so our job as immigration attorneys is to provide all of the information necessary so that an informed decision can be made. In particular, with some of the more gray areas in the E-2, such as processing times, because as we're going to talk about, it is a moving target. These things are not static. And so let's dive right into it. The first thing I want to say is this is not legal advice. Why is this not moving forward? This is for informational purposes only. And if you want a legal opinion, please feel free to schedule a consultation with us or schedule a consultation with Patrick with regards to the business side of the E-2 decision making. Again, my name is Joey Barnett. I'm here with Patrick. Patrick, why don't you give just a brief introduction about Visa Franchise and Vetted Biz and what you guys do?
Yeah, definitely. So my brother and I started Visa Franchise back in 2015, and including the Vetted Biz brand, it's morphed into a media, data, and advisory company. Right now, we have 40 employees across the brands. And essentially, with Visa Franchise, we act as your advisor, finding and analyzing businesses, principally franchises that are eligible for the E-2 visa, as well as other visa categories as Joey best sees fit. Vetted Biz was just our offline database for all the thousands of franchises that we had in our repository in Visa Franchise. Put that online in 2019, started monetizing in 2021, and now it's the second most visited franchise website. So it's mostly geared towards Americans that are looking to invest, buy a franchise or buy a whole franchise system. But we have the data from Vetted Biz, which is essentially a media and data company that helps our clients at Visa Franchise find and analyze the ideal franchise and reduce the risk and reduce the time that it takes to make a decision and apply with an E-2 visa through Joey and his colleagues at WR Immigration.
So Patrick, are there some franchises that just don't fit with the E-2 category?
Well, first, there's a lot of just bad franchises. So it's like Subway, you invest $350K and you're going to be working there every day and you'll make $60,000. and you can buy an existing subway for 150K. And there's not enough margin for a day-to-day manager in most cases. So maybe you get up to 3 locations and you're going across the different locations. So there's a lot of bad franchises that have passed their prime or they never were a good business. So we have to avoid those, even if it's eligible for the E-2 visa. And then it's like, all right, which ones have a substantial enough investment where you can add in a car if you need a car for your business and it's a property management business, and getting to that substantial amount where it makes sense for that type of business and meeting the E-2 visa requirement. And you have contractors and or employees in the business. And pretty much across the board, most franchises are going to meet the E-2 visa eligibility. However, the franchisor, if they had one negative experience with an E-2 visa candidate, they don't want to have any more. So UPS store had one negative experience. They said, we don't want to accept any more E-2 visa candidates. I don't like the UPS store model even, but it's just not available anymore for E-2 visa candidates. Same with L1, EB5 direct. So all it takes is one bad apple that just maybe invested in the business and then went home and left the business, or there was, some problem with communicating the delays to the E-2 visa processing where they just cut it and that franchise brand no longer wants to accept E-2 visa candidates. A lot of what we do at Visa Franchise is educating franchisors and trying to get them comfortable, especially the best systems, to accept our clients as candidates. So that's a big part of what we do, educating both franchise investors as well as franchise brands about the benefits of having, which oftentimes a foreign national already had a business. They're not leaving some corporate life, which is usually the case in the US, where they'd never run their own business and they're going into franchising. We have clients that are managing, like on the property manager I mentioned, over 400 units. But that case, he already had a business that was successful in Latin America. So he knew how to scale up, manage people, roll up his sleeves. So there's a lot of benefits to the E-2 visa that franchise brands just need to be educated on and need to see some nice case studies.
Excellent. And actually, that's a great leeway into what I kind of wanted to talk about before we really get going. There's 4 important sort of considerations or comments about E-2 that I want investors to keep in mind as they listen in on this webinar and on YouTube and as you go through the E-2 process. The first is that immigration attorneys don't provide financial and investment advice. That's why you talk to Patrick, is to educate yourself and to help understand, hey, is this actually a good investment decision to make? My job is to prepare and file the application, to get you ready for that super important consular interview, and to make sure that the process of moving here is quicker. But as Patrick alluded to, running a business in a new country is a lot easier said than done. And so you want to make sure that you guys are informed about what you can do and how it's going to actually succeed before you make that investment. All right, let's move on to our overview here. And I guess the other couple comments that I wanted to make are, when it comes to E-2, consular officers have a fair amount of discretion when reviewing these applications and making determinations about eligibility. And it's possible that the same case could have a different result if you're dealing with a different officer or potentially a different consulate. We generally like to prepare our clients for all of the possibilities that could happen, and so that they feel confident in answering any questions that may come up during that interview process. Because when you are at that interview, they are looking at your answers just as much as they're looking at the paper application. So that's one thing that I want to say. We're talking about timing with E-2. And as I mentioned at the top, it's a moving target. These are not static time frames. Every day, there are emails from immigration attorneys on these listservs saying, hey, I have a client who is applying in Buenos Aires, what's the current processing time today? Hey, I got a client applying in Copenhagen. What's it look like today? And depending on capacity and workload and what priorities that the consulate has, those can change over time. And the last thing, the general comment that I want to say before we dive in is, and I wrote this on LinkedIn, is that no immigration attorney can pour a secret sauce on your case to get the petition in front of an officer quicker or to get an adjudication faster. It's one of those things where we work to put the best case together. And like many things in immigration, you have to keep the faith that everything is going to work out for those if you follow the rules. And those are the sort of the general comments that I wanted to make. So we're going to be talking about the basic requirements of E-2, the advantages of E-2, and strategies on speeding up the E-2 processing times, whether that's at a US consulate or potentially doing it here in the United States through what is called a change of status. And we're going to dive into the details. And then finally, we're going to open it up to Patrick, and he's going to take us on a tour of his visa franchise and vetted business websites. And I think he provides really great information. I wouldn't be doing this webinar with him if I didn't believe in him and his product and his business and his team. They have done great things for our clients, and I think he will be able to do the same for you as well. Patrick, anything you wanted to add before we dive in?
No, yeah, I appreciate that. I thought it summarized pretty well what we're going to jump in on.
Awesome. Okay, so the basic requirements. The first thing is that you have to be a citizen of a country with an E-2 treaty. And the Immigration and Nationality Act requires a treaty between your country that you're a citizen of and the United States in order to apply for the E-2. And as of December last year, Portugal is now an E-2 treaty country. Interestingly, though, they haven't updated the Department of State website to include Portugal, and they haven't updated the DOS manual, which sort of governs how consular officers review and analyze and approve cases to include Portugal either. I looked that up this morning. But many countries have it. I believe there's over 70 countries that have those treaties. Some of the countries that do not have those treaties, which have a lot of individuals, are Russia, India, China, Brazil. Those countries do not have a treaty at this time for an E-2. And one of the new wrinkles in E-2 is this star that I have, which has to do with acquiring nationality through a financial investment. Congress and President Joe Biden just passed a new law that says, well, hey, if you got your nationality and citizenship through that financial investment, you must be domiciled in that country for no less than 3 years before using that passport to apply for the E-2 visa. That just happened last month. And there has been no real guidance from the Department of State on that. So I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty on what that means, what type of domicile is required, whether a donation is a financial investment under the terms of this new law, or other strategies like potentially using a spouse as opposed to the investor who got the treaty nationality.
I imagine, Joey, it's going to be kind of like case by case, like depending like their circumstance, and if it was through real estate or donation, like kind of what's the best strategy forward if they're going to do the E-2 visa.
Right. But I will say, you and I had a client, is a Nigerian national who did obtain Grenada citizenship through financial investment. We applied in Lagos, Nigeria, and he got his E-2 visas issued this month after this new law went into effect, without having continuous period of 3 years living in Grenada. So it hasn't been implemented yet. We don't know when it will be. But I imagine there will be notices, and in the Foreign Affairs Manual, there will be updates in that we'll have to review at the time.
And his business is already open in a Walmart in Texas. So we look forward to seeing the growth of his E-2 business.
Exactly. Exactly. So, when they say, you have to invest, the big question is, well, what you have to have a substantial investment. That is a relatively vague term. And it depends on the type of business that you are going to be operating, what substantial means. My general rule of thumb is I want to see a minimum of 100 or 150K investment into this US business. And ideally, I want to see that a good amount of that has already been spent, because you can argue then that it is irrevocably committed capital, and that it is part of a real and operating enterprise. Patrick, when you're looking at the Visa franchise or the franchise opportunities, what are you generally seeing in terms of this issue and the amount of the investment?
Depends on your risk tolerance. Hey, if you want to try to apply for 80K and you know that it's going to increase your chances of denial and you're totally okay with that, all right. But I don't prefer that. I'd like you to invest 150K. So whatever you need to do to get up there, whether it's prepaying your Google ad spend, Facebook ad spend, your trips to the United States, your company car, the franchise fee, everything to get to ideally 150K or more, but definitely 100K, you should do it, especially if you're married and you have kids and you have a decent net worth. Don't play games with this, because we've seen it where people don't follow advice of their immigration attorney. They don't sign the lease. They don't commit the funds. They get denied. They reapply. It takes another 9 months. The kid's school year is all screwed up. And it was to what? Save 30K and you're worth 2 million. So it's going to depend on your income as well as your net worth. But if you have a substantial net worth, if you have proper income, you shouldn't play games with the amount and just do something that makes it needs to be as complete as possible. And the government doesn't say, the consulate don't say, but 100K, 150K, it starts checking the box of some items. That's what I've seen.
Exactly. I mean, in our practice, we are very conservative in this regard. I've seen other immigration attorneys say, hey, we've got an E2s for as little as 30K. And I say, good luck. You go ahead with those cases. I'm not going to touch them. We want to
and
file.
It's like, what would the legal fee, your time to do that case, it would justify double the legal fee. And then all of a sudden, it just doesn't make any sense. Spend the money on the business investment and you're going to have, it's going to be easier for everyone and less costly potentially.
One thing that I'm asked about a lot by potential E2 investors is, well, hey, can we put the funds in escrow and have the funds be released upon issuance of the visa? And the answer is yes, you can. And that is allowed in the Foreign Affairs Manual, but it heightens the risk.
I would agree with that. And we spoke, I had an Egyptian denial and a Pakistani denial where it was just everything in escrow. And the consulate officer saying no knew that this guy was going to get all the funds back, and neither of them reapplied. So they got denied for intent not to, the reason was intent not to go home to Egypt, go home to Pakistan. I don't know if there was something else there, but that was the reason of denial. They got the funds back. They didn't move to the US. We kind of all wasted our time. I would have loved them to try to reapply and try to redo the business plan and also show that they had businesses in their home country, homes in their home country, that they had really serious connections there. But they got the money back and that was it.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, it's a good point that, and I may have mentioned this previously, is I like to see irrevocable investment, and you show that it's committed by spending the money. And you have to demonstrate that it's a real and operational enterprise. And so I like to see employees on payroll, revenue coming in, maybe some business contracts already established so that you can provide those to the consular officer and say, hey, look, this business is set up and we already have employees. I'm coming over to help direct and develop it and to grow the company, but we've already spent the money and it's already operational. Those are the types of cases that I think are the strongest when you're going in front of a consulate officer.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, it's like what's needed to continue to grow the business that the visa is holding you back to grow your business. So, if it's a business that requires a certain license, like an insurance franchise, we've had a lot of clients invest in insurance franchises. They need a visa for that license. They have an employee that already has a license. The business is open or it's about to open, but the E-2 visa investor needs that visa to get the social security number to sit for the insurance exam to further grow the business and not rely on one key manager.
Interesting. And so in those instances, they hire the key manager. They have, I imagine, customers already that are lined up, or at least showing that they can line up. And that's what they use to demonstrate that it's real and operational in order to get that visa so that they can enter and take that exam. Is that how that works?
Exactly. Yeah. They own 100% of this entity that already has business transactions, revenue, cost, and expenses. And there is one or two key employees, someone that has the license to actually be running an insurance business. But the owner should ultimately, you don't want to rely on just one key employee should he quit. So it really needs to be the owner that sits for that insurance exam. And you have other industries, whether it's home care, real estate, property management, state by state, it's going to depend. But you as the business owner should take ownership and make sure that you have the proper licenses and everything needed to run your business should an employee quit. And you lean heavily on the franchisor to understand what those requirements are and how to expedite the process of getting that license.
You mentioned business plan earlier, and that to me gets to the issue of marginality, because an E-2 enterprise cannot be marginal. And again, that is also a relatively vague term, but what they say about marginality is that it has to have the present or future capacity to support more than just the investor and his immediate family. And so I will not file a new E-2 business case without a business plan included that has a financial pro forma for the next 5 years and some projections about revenue, about total income, about number of employees, so that you can make the argument that with it, by the end of the next 5 years, even if it's marginal at this current time, maybe it's operating in a loss for the first 6 months or 12 months, but by the end of that 5-year period, hey, we're in a good position, and you have the backup of a business plan that you can point the consular officer to.
Yeah, the business plan can make or break a case. We don't do business plans. You have your network of professionals, business plans, writers that connect with the franchisors to understand what franchisees in the past have done over a 5-year period to paint that story of revenue, employee count, contractor count, and all that. But I don't think we've had, hundreds of cases over the years. I don't think we've ever had a case where they didn't have a business plan, even when they were acquiring an existing franchise, a franchise resell. It seems like it's like a low enough expense to pay for the business plan, and that's included as part of the substantial investment requirements. So
exactly, and I think it provides some credibility
yeah,
to the consular officer that, hey, this isn't just something that I'm throwing money at and I haven't thought through. We've really spent some time and thought about the financial performance of this business. And I think that goes to show a more serious intent to, hey, that I really am directing and developing this new enterprise. And that gets to the last basic requirement here, which is that the investor must direct and develop the enterprise. And this is something that I wanted to talk to you about, Patrick, and sort of the use of a day-to-day manager to maybe oversee the operations, maybe like in let's say you're running a food franchise, for example. You don't necessarily want to be behind the counter directing and developing the employees there.
Definitely. And it's like also not credible. Like we've had 3 billionaire clients that did the E-2 visa because they didn't want a green card. And if they were the one providing the end service, like it's just a joke. The consul officer can Google and see that they're on Forbes.
Right.
So they have a manager doing all that. And it's part of a holding company that might be the E-2 visa business that's doing investments. And we have a nice anchor franchise as part of that E-2 visa holding company. But there's a lot of activities that chairman executive's doing. And there's that anchor franchise, but they're also doing real estate investments, investing in other operating businesses, M&A, you name it. Like it doesn't make, you don't want to, it needs to make sense. And what you put forward based on their background is what they're actually going to be doing. And
Right.
that the consulate officer thinks they're going to be doing that based on what their experience has been.
Yeah, it's a really good point, in particular for those who may not have the skills or experience in running a business. That won't necessarily stop you from applying for an E-2 to do a new business in the United States, but certainly it's something that a consulate officer is going to be looking at. Hey, you've spent the past 2 decades, maybe I'm making this up out of thin air. You spent the last 2 decades working in the real estate business. You manage commercial properties. Okay, now you're going and you want to open up let's just say a home healthcare franchise. Pretty much 2 completely different industries. There are skills that you have learned and acquired that can be used in any industry as a commercial real estate operator. But there are sometimes, I think in particular for maybe like younger applicants or those who, are still maybe just students or things like that, they may have a little bit more critical eye. Have you had any experience with that where they've
We've
looked
had
at
the gamut. I mean,
Okay.
70% of our clients are high net worth. So say 2 mil plus, and they're making at least 300K a year. It's a very different profile than someone that's going to be rolling up their sleeves, investing 100K, trying to do as little as possible. They're going to have to put in the work. So they're going to be doing a lot of things in the beginning and like scale up over time. But that investor that has already kind of made it and maybe has business interests abroad, they're say investing 250K and the franchisor helps source that day-to-day manager. And they're more on the strategy side. How are they going to continue to expand? Key hiring, firing decisions, approving major expenses over 5K. It's what a CEO does. And there's that first small business, but ideally they're expanding beyond that. And the business plan writer together with you, Joey, and your team is building that case of what they're going to do in the United States over the next 5 years. And it doesn't, the franchise can be the anchor and kind of the base of that business plan, but it's like, what else are the other activities that they're looking to explore, looking to do? I received a call last week, a client that invested in a barbershop franchise back in 2016, one location here in Miami, and he's now on his 9th location.
Wow.
So he has built together with the franchisor that really helps a lot on sourcing the key managers of the business, 9 locations. This is what? Oh yeah, it's been like 6-7 years and he's up to the 9th location. So the
Wow,
US
what a great
things
success
can move
story.
fast. And like he has like 1,000+ person company in Brazil. So he doesn't think small. It's okay, I'm investing in the first barbershop, but I would like to continue to expand this if it goes well with the franchise brand, or I want to open it up and keep the business plan somewhat open to explore some other opportunities with Visa franchise or with a business broker, whoever, to see how I can continue to do business in the US.
I love that. That's a great success story. That's congratulations to him and to you for putting that together and getting them here. I mean, I know it's his hard work that did
His
it.
hard work, and then a franchisor that has really strong core values and lives by them and treats our client well and wanting to grow together with the franchisee. And sadly, there are franchisors that really take advantage of franchisees. I interviewed a couple of franchisees of Massage Envy in LA County, and the franchisor just screwed them over from everything they've said. So you really have to understand who's the owner of that franchise system, how have they behaved in the past, especially in bad times, and depending on their experience and their track record, and you vet that talking to actual franchisees, you can make an educated decision and partner up with a franchise brand where the owners and executives have done the right thing time after time again.
Awesome. So I'm not going to read everything here about the advantages of the E-2 that you see on this screen, but there's a lot of flexibility with the E-2. One of the big changes that have happened in the past year or two is that the spouse now has unrestricted work authorization at the time of entry.
Yeah, it's a huge game changer. They don't have to wait like what, 3, 6, 9 months to get the employment authorization card.
Exactly. So that's a really big key. So the E-2 treaty investor is only allowed to work for that treaty enterprise, but the spouse has unrestricted work authorization, can start their own business, can work for any US employer without any further sponsorship. It is a very,
on that point, we've seen an increase of Visa franchise clients where it's like a data architect, a software engineer, and a petroleum engineer was in our office last week, where the E-2 Visa, you get that for the family, and then the spouse gets a job, and maybe, in Colombia they're making 30, 40K a year. In Houston, they're making 150, 200. So the E-2 Visa business, there's not as much pressure to perform that first year, that second year. You can take some time because you also have the income coming in from the employee. And then if they like the employee, we've seen the employer sponsor them for an EB3, EB2, all different types of green card categories.
I like that. One of the big things that clients always need to be reminded on is the difference between a visa and status.
Definitely.
And a visa is really just the ability to go to a port of entry and make an application for admission. Status is your actual immigration status that you have in the United States when the officer at the airport stamps your passport, or if you're in the United States and you do a change of status or an extension of status. And with the E-2, you have, depending on what country, but the maximum is up to 5-year visa. So you don't have to go back to the consulate and get a new visa. You can travel in and out of the United States with that visa during that 5-year period or whatever the validity is on that visa. But every time that you come in, you would have a maximum of 2 years of E-2 status in the United States. So before, if you travel in and out, every time you come in, you get a new 2 years of status. If you don't want to travel, then you need to file for an extension of status before it runs out. And that's something that you'll have to work with. You would work with us, and we have automatic calendar reminders based on when you enter and things like that. But it's something that you are responsible for, and every individual and family member is kind of working on their own in that regard. So a father comes in and out, but a child stays here. Well, the child may need to do an extension of status if he's not traveling in and out of the country too. We've had that happen, unfortunately, but there are lots of advantages, and that's why I think a lot of people do the E-2 in particular. If you don't spend time in the United States, I'm not a tax professional, but there are ways that you can avoid taxation on your worldwide income if you're not considered a US person under the substantial presence test. Again, talk with your international tax advisors on that.
We've had clients give up green cards because they have a significant inheritance abroad. And it's like they just don't want to pay taxes on that inheritance. God forbid they die, or when they pass away. So they give up their green card and do the E-2. But yeah, that you definitely need a tax advisor. And again, like you get what you pay for. So
Right.
you could be saving millions of dollars, and the thousands of dollars that you pay for the attorney are generally going to be worth it.
Yep. I promised myself and Patrick that I wouldn't talk too much about EB5, that this is an E2 webinar, but I do want to say that a lot of folks use E2 as a short-term non-immigrant visa strategy to enter the United States in a quicker way than waiting for an EB5 case to be approved. And in particular, now with the new EB5 rules where you can do an adjustment of status based on a pending I-526, we're expecting E2 to become a lot more popular in that regard. And it's not just EB5. Patrick and I were talking about how, in particular for those from Latin American countries, EB2, EB3, this is a nice way to get to the United States quicker and then go through the green card process. Of course, you do have to have the intent to depart upon application and at the interview and when you're making your entry with the E2, but circumstances can change. And it's interesting, in the Foreign Affairs Manual, they say you have to have your intent to depart, and certainly that's what we advise, but they also say in there that you can sell your home in the foreign country and move here. And so it's a little bit of a quasi dual intent type visa. It is something that we are very careful about, and you need to have very good immigration counsel on this, because the last thing that you want is any sort of claim of misrepresentation or visa fraud coming in on a non-immigrant visa.
Do you feel it's more credible, or you've seen it's more credible, like going E2 to EB5 versus like someone studying an English course and getting an F1, then switching over to EB5?
Yeah, I think, there's the 30, 60-day rule for USCIS, the 90-day rule for the Department of State. We're very conservative on this. We certainly want folks to follow the rules of the US immigration laws. I would think, though, in your example, yeah, it is a little bit, I think, less risky to kind of come in on the E2 as opposed to, are you really a bona fide student if you're coming in just to do an English course and then 60 days later you file for an adjustment of status? I think that has some possibilities for some red flags there.
Yeah, we've seen a lot, especially Brazilians playing that game where it's more of a tax play, where they're doing the F1. They're here for 4 years doing some kind of course that they're not actually interested in, and then it comes time to switch over. And I'm sure that can kind of raise, some flags.
And it will.
Yeah.
You can be sure of that. It will raise the flags. Okay, so now let's get into sort of what you guys are all here for, which is sort of the filing procedures and how to make this a faster process. Every consulate has their own different process, and you go to the US consulate website, they have their requirements, they have certain tabs that you have to complete, certain requirements on how they want the application to go through. But in general, is you either schedule the appointment right away and then you submit the application for review, or you submit the application for review, and when that's approved, then you're invited to schedule an appointment. And they will take a look at the initial application, and if they believe that you have sort of a prima facie case of being eligible, then they'll ask you to come in for an interview at the consular post. The timing on this can vary. Yesterday, I had a client who's doing a restaurant in the Boston area, schedule an appointment in Paris for a new E2 business. He was able to schedule it for mid-March. So that's not too far out. In London, I'm seeing it being around 2 to 3 months. In Buenos Aires, similar, maybe a little bit shorter.
Exactly.
In Germany, 3 to 4 months. In Canada, we're seeing around 6 months or so for new registration. that was much longer
It
before.
was like 9 months.
Yeah, or even longer
Yeah.
in the height of the pandemic, when they were sort of minimizing how many people they wanted to, coming into the actual consulate. Those have started to come down. There have been some consulates who have sort of refused to do E-2 visa adjudications, like in Barbados, and I think in Bogota for a little bit of time, but we're starting.
Barbados is finally starting to get approvals out of there.
Yeah, I think but we're starting to see some
Like
changes
2.5
there.
years later, they're open back up.
Exactly. So, like I said at the beginning, these things are not static. They do change. Every month, the Department of State posts their non-immigrant visa statistics. And some of the more, I guess, active E-2 processing consulates are in Seoul in South Korea. In Mexico City is very popular. Paris, as I mentioned before, Toronto is where they do the new Canada registrations. Those are really popular. Are you seeing any certain areas, Patrick, where you've seen a big pickup in processing at all, other than Barbados, what you mentioned?
Colombia was also frozen, like basically since COVID. Like a lot of these, I shouldn't say a lot. Well, the consulates like pretty much across the world shut down for E-2 visas, like anywhere from 6 months to 2.5 years.
Yeah.
That's what we've seen. And then like slowly they've been processing them. But a lot of our clients are dual nationals. So they see what either where they're residing, and then maybe the spouse also has a different passport. And it's like that then opens up 3 options of where they could potentially apply. And they just go with what the fastest option is. Obviously there's different strategies there, and it's not just the fastest option where Joey's going to obviously come into play. But yeah, we usually, how I see it, like if there's a will, there's a way. And you had mentioned the change of status option in the US, where we had over the years many Turkish clients that will just do a change of status, do premium processing, switch to E-2 visa, 2 weeks, they have the E-2 visa status, and they were going to go back home for the summer anyways. And that's what a lot of our European, Latin American, Asian clients do. They're here for the kids' calendar year. They have somewhat of flexibility, and they spend time, both the investor and the spouse, or just the spouse or investor, and they go back home and get the E-2 visa. And yeah, so there's a lot of different options, and I think it just depends on when the investor's timeline is, and usually it's driven by the school calendar, and it's right. Like every August they want to be able to move here, say June, so there's a 2-month buffer to get their kids in school.
Right. So you just mentioned a few different things that I kind of want to break down. First, let's talk about, and it's on the bottom of this slide, third country national processing. The Department of State has said, hey, if the processing in your home country is too long for you, then go ahead and try to apply at a different consulate. There's nothing stopping you from doing that, which I think as a general sense is true, but really it's up to that consulate's discretion as to whether they'll accept you for an interview. And I think what you were alluding to is they want to see that you're either a passport holder of that country or have some sort of residency.
Nexus, right?
Some nexus.
I think pre-COVID, it was fine. Like we had clients applying in Canada or applying in
Mexico.
A Swedish client that applied in Madrid. Sweden was taking like 6 months and Madrid was a month. So working with his immigration attorney, they applied in Madrid. He got the E-2 visa. But it seems like they're not that open these days in 2023.
Yeah, it seems like it's gotten a little bit more restrictive, though there isn't anything stopping anybody from trying. It's sort of about their willingness to travel and potentially, willingness to delay if you're trying to go into consulate X before trying to go to consulate Y. But that is an option as a way to get in front of a consulate officer a little bit quicker. You also mentioned change of status. So this gets to the point that we were talking about earlier about the difference between a visa and status, immigration status in the United States. It is possible if you come in on a let's say a tourist visa because you want to go to Disneyland, or you're coming in and you're putting your kid to school and they're here on an F1 visa and you're accompanying them with your visitor visa, and you decide, you know what, I want to do the franchise now. You can file with USCIS for a change of status application. And you can do that with premium processing and get a decision within 15 calendar days. That gets around the requirement of applying for an E-2 visa at a consulate abroad. The big, I would say, downside of this is that you don't have the ability to leave the United States and then re-enter to work for that company. You would have to apply for a visa to re-enter. But for a short-term type of thing, it's an option. And if you want to just continue to be here and do extension of statuses, and your business continues to be viable, then hey, that might be a way to get here quicker. We have definitely done that. In particular, during COVID, I think extension of status and change of status applications for E-2s with USCIS went way up because of what Patrick was saying. The consulates were just closed.
We had a bunch of Canadians that were just snowbirds kind of like stuck here.
Yeah.
And then they just changed status to E-2.
Mm-hmm.
And it made sense. Like, took them some time to find the business, and it wasn't their original intent, but they decided they wanted to do business in the United States, and the E-2 visa status made sense.
Yep.
And I think it's just Canada, correct me if I'm wrong, that you could do visa-free travel into the United States and switch, but ESTA, like if you're an Italian passport holder, I couldn't just come here and then switch to the E-2 visa status.
Right. ESTA, there are different rules around that as opposed to coming in on an actual visitor visa. Yeah. And, in my opinion, when you're looking at, hey, how am I going to get my case processed the quickest? The last thing that you want is to be put in administrative processing, which is a black hole, and it can be difficult to get out of that. And so that's why I think the first bullet is the most important, no matter where you're applying. You want to have an approvable case. You want to have a business that is already operational, that already has US workers on payroll. And you can say that your money is irrevocably committed and it is a real and operating enterprise. Those to me are the best cases. And that's what I always advise my clients on, is you want to put your best foot forward and make it easy for the consulate to approve your case and issue you and your family the visas.
Yeah, like administrative processing, it seems like kind of like getting waitlisted at university, where your chances of like making it in once you're on the wait list, it's like an easy way to basically say no, but we're not going to give a hard no right away for different reasons. Right. I haven't heard of many cases where they're able to get the E-2 visa successfully, at least not having to put together a whole new case to then get approved.
And there are different levels of administrative processing. Maybe sometimes they just need, one more birth certificate, right? Yeah. And because you didn't submit that in the initial application. Okay, that's a relatively simple thing. It may delay it for a few weeks or maybe a month or two, but that's different than, hey, you know what? I just don't believe in this business plan, or whatever, maybe there's a past immigration violation that you didn't disclose or something like that, that would cause them to take a closer look at your case and not approve it at the time of the interview. One thing that we also see relate to expedite requests. And this is actually how we were able to get our client who applied in Lagos, Nigeria.
That's right.
A faster,
because the business was operating and he really needed to be there.
He really needed to be there. And he already had US workers who were on payroll. And the argument that we made was, look, without his actual physical presence here in the United States, these folks could lose their jobs. And that is
and I saw it firsthand, like opening up a second bank account, getting the payroll provider to understand, like it's just much easier if you're actually here on the ground and much more credible.
And so we were able to get that case expedited, and he got an appointment, I would say, within a few weeks of submitting the case. Whereas normally I think it's around 6 to 8 months or so at that consulate.
Exactly.
So there are ways to do it. They want to see a possibility of a severe financial loss to the U.S. enterprise, or potentially if there's some sort of urgent humanitarian reason. Medical issues are always very important. Those are individualized, case-specific considerations that you would discuss with your immigration attorney. But there are ways to try to expedite. Of course, consulates probably receive lots of different expedite requests or emergency appointment requests. And so it's really critical to get yours to stand out and to put your best argument forward right away. And I think job loss for U.S. workers is a very, very strong case with regard, or a strong reason for a consulate to expedite the review and potentially get your interview quicker.
Joey, we're getting to the top of the hour. Do you want to
Yep.
go through any other key points on the presentation, or can we go
No.
ahead and go into some of the Q&A?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also, I know I tended to talk a little bit too much. I also do want to give your websites a tour as well. So maybe let me stop my sharing so that you can pull up yours. And in the meantime, we can, I stopped, so you should be able to do it. And let me take a look at some of these questions here.
Yeah, I mean, I think super quickly, we produce a lot of free content on our blog as well as our YouTube channel for Visa Franchise. But we're here to save you time and invest in the right business. We want to reduce your risk and increase your chances of success in the US. We're primarily focused on the business. We trust Joey is going to get your E-2 visa. We want to focus on your business success in the US. And we help clients that are going to work day to day in the business, as well as those that need a manager to help with some of the key tasks of the business. So you would be investing generally more money and more of an executive role, like that client that's now onto the 9th barbershop. He's not cutting hair. He's focused on like real estate acquisition and bigger.
But as he was saying, there is a lot of great content, a lot of good information on their websites. I really do recommend that if you're interested in learning more about those franchise opportunities, you peruse those. Oh, it looks like he's back.
Yeah, it looks like I got something happened there, but we have the two links we'll send over, but it's visafranchise.com and vettedbiz.com, our database. Do we want to jump in on some of the questions, Joey?
Yeah, I see some here. The first one, is there a minimum amount for the E-2 investment? We answered this before. It has to be substantial. I like seeing 150K minimum, with a good portion of that spent by the time that you make the application. Although it does depend, again, on your level of risk and the type of business that you're investing in. If you're going to be selling cell phone cases at a kiosk in a mall, the investment amount for that business is just significantly less than if you're going to be trying to build the next electric vehicle, right? So it depends on the type of business that you are looking to establish in the United States. When investing into a restaurant, will it reduce the chances of approval if the primary investor depends on the expertise of a restaurant manager, if the investor doesn't have the restaurant experience per se? Okay, so we kind of answered this a little bit earlier. I don't think it will reduce the chances of approval as long as you can demonstrate that the principal investor is still able to direct and develop the enterprise, even if it's not the day-to-day management of the restaurant. And that's exactly what Patrick was talking about with our barbershop example. And we've had plenty of cases where the E-2 investor is making sort of those high-level decision-making, doing the accounting, making sure that the all contracts are being followed through on, doing business development,
hiring, firing,
and leaving sort of the day-to-day operational stuff done by someone who has that
mentoring,
experience.
I would say added in too. A
Yeah.
lot of times the investors like 55, 60, and the key managers late 20s, 30s. He needs support.
And then there's a couple questions here about the residency rule. Not able to show the 3-year residency if you're only in the country for part of the year. Look, it says continuous for not less than 3 years. I'm going to say continuous until we have better guidance from the Department of State. It's just it's a gray area in the law right now. So I apologize, Linda. I think it's a great question. I don't think anyone can really answer that with much certainty at this time. Linda also mentions that Taiwan, which is one of the more active spots, is taking about 7 months right now for an E-2 appointment. I had a client apply last month, and he was able to get an appointment in April. So that was only 4 months or so. We have tried an expedite on that. It didn't go through. You know, when it comes to expedites, they don't even have to respond. You can't appeal that decision. It's completely discretionary. If they don't respond within a week or two, I would take that as the expedite has been denied. Although I guess there's nothing stopping you from trying a second time if there's a changed circumstance that would necessitate an expedite or emergency request. Okay, so those are all the questions that we got. We took a lot of time. We will be sending this around if you've registered. We will be putting it up on YouTube. You will see it on LinkedIn. We thank you so much for spending some of your Thursday with us. Again, if you guys, this is my contact information. Patrick, how can they reach you?
The easiest is patrick@visafranchise.com, or just applying to be a client on visafranchise.com.
Excellent. Well, we hope this was informational and helpful. And Patrick, as always, I always enjoy working with you and love speaking with you. So thank you so much for.
No, thanks a lot for hosting, and all your colleagues for all the setup. It was fun. I really enjoyed it.
Excellent. Well, thank you all, and have a good afternoon.